Hi, I'm Tim Linsdau. I'm a video producer and a Christian. I'm also a fan of history. Study history, try to learn from it. I believe that when the founding fathers of this United States formed that Constitution, and before that the Declaration of Independence, based on a very good knowledge of history. Much better, I think, maybe than anybody today. A lot of the Western traditions of the Roman and Greek educations, if you will, must have had an impact on them. Their experience from England. England had been, well, you know, at least 1,000 years of history. Having all of that knowledge they put together to help better understand the human condition, how people behave, their relationship with their Creator. That was important because I think they were thinking outside of themselves. That these basic freedoms we have are from God, are something outside of us. That was very important. It's something that exists from eternity. And that it, I watched a movie. I'm sorry, I can't quite remember the title, but I believe it's A Woman Rides Ahead. And a story about this woman who was a portraiture painter. And she had a professional reputation, success in New York and Washington, painting politicians, senators, vice president, and she knew of Sitting Bull, the great Sioux war chief, the one who was involved in Custer's last stand. And he was still alive in 1890. And you have to realize this is 14 years after Custer's last stand, after the Indians wiped out, killed everyone in his unit, including himself. And so, and Sitting Bull had spent time with Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show, something like 10 years, I think. So, Sitting Bull had a reputation. I mean, he was a celebrity. And yet he was living out on the reservation in South Dakota, quite remote. Realizing, I think, that old way, that old life that the Plains Indians had was long gone. And she was probably looking at, this was the end of that and the end of this man, and he had quite a history, and she wanted to get a painting of him. And she was a widow, so she was free to do whatever she wanted to, but traveling in the West in 1890, it was still a dangerous effort, especially for a woman by herself. But she meets him, and there's a whole story behind that, and makes that painting before Sitting Bull is killed in an incident on the reservation, and following that is Wounded Knee, which is a terrible thing in American history, where about 300 Indians were killed by the cavalry. It was a terrible end to a terrible history. But I've thought about that history, that American Indians, the original Aboriginal tribes, had been here for who knows how long. And how many of those tribes had come here and pushed other tribes aside. I believe the Lakota Sioux were pretty valiant warriors, were known for pushing other tribes out of the way. And hope I'm accurate on that, but it seemed like I am. But warfare among the Indians was nothing new. That was a part of their culture in defending their tribes. And I think one has to understand that as Europe and other nations closed in on this continent, on the New World, it was going to happen. These people from all over the world, once they discovered this place was here and filled with Aboriginal tribes, whatever their reasoning, it was going to happen. Those people were going to come here for opportunity and lay claim. And once they discovered they had far more power than those who existed here, what was to stop them? One way or another, they were coming, and they were going to rule this place. And the American Indian was going to become a conquered people, like myriads of conquered tribes and nations before them. This was going to happen. And I think Sitting Bull saw that, knew that the old ways were over. But America, I have to remember that even though there was a lot of bad stuff that happened, I kind of wonder at times, then why did they create the reservation system in the first place? And I've sometimes thought, well, maybe they felt bad about it. They had some obligation to give the Indians reservations. And of course they messed that up, pared that down, took it away, and you know, you've heard much of that history. But either way, this was going to happen. But I was impressed by the spirit nature of the Indians. They always spoke of the Great Spirit, and they were spiritual. What that meant, where it went, I hope the best for their spirits. Wherever it went, I don't know. But they seemed to be very spiritual, and it meant a lot to them. And it was probably very difficult for those that really believed in a Great Spirit that they would be so put down and so destroyed. But what's the will of God? Sometimes it makes no sense to us. But I believe He has perfect will. He's the one that knows what needs to be done. When He allows things to happen, it's either made for good or it's meant for good. It might not look that way. I understand that. But He's the one that has the ability and knowledge that we don't. And we can just barely comprehend it or apprehend it. Barely grasp it in what sense it makes. But the reservation still exists. Many of them have casinos on them, and they have more wealth than they ever imagined. I don't know how many in percentage of all the American Indians are in that position, but it has happened without firing a shot. And some tribes actually use that opportunity of the money to buy more land, which is kind of an interesting irony that after 120 years at the close of the frontier in 1890, that here they would be having these successful businesses on their land. But you have to remember that land was even though taken, it was given also for them and their children. It's kind of a strange thing to understand where that came from, but it's history. You can look at it that way. It's history. It's something that happened, for good or for bad. People are people. We're all human beings. We all have faults, weaknesses. But we must strive to do the best we can for ourselves, our families, and those we serve. When it comes to the American Indian, maybe you get to know one. The thing is, like my family, my history is Prussian, I've been told, and some British. Well, whatever tribe that you get back millennia or a couple of millennia I came from, probably long wiped out. So I had no knowledge of what that was. So it helps me as a human being to just focus on being me, a human being, a child of God, and not caught up in a tribal issue. But when it's fresh, like it is with the Indians, I can see that's a struggle. But just a little talk on history today and my thoughts and opinions of it all. I'm Tim Linsdau. Like and comment on my video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.